I got a story to tell you today. It's an important story about accelerated aging. And you go, accelerated aging, who wants to listen to that? I want to listen about age reversal and anti-aging and all the other fun stuff and biohacking. Well, let me tell you, I happened to come across, or two people were working with me. They don't know each other. They happen to be about almost the exact same age. And their labs triggered something in me saying, something's going on here. They had one factor in common, which we'll explore. Something they were doing was the exact same thing. And I started going deeper and deeper and deeper into this. And the surprise was, first, I came up with, wow, this is actually making them getting older faster. That was a surprise. And then going through all the details that we're going to go through today, and then in another part of the video, another video, was how ordinary this was, and therefore how I would say nearly everybody is accelerating their aging because of the same reason these people were, and similar reasons. And so that was the ultimate surprise, was the banality, the commonality that shared with most people. But it's going to be a story about labs. So let's get into it. Ready for a surprise? I want to start here by saying when one goes to a doctor or healthcare practitioner that's allowed to do labs, which I'm hoping your health practitioner can, is that you start here. You get sheets of labs. And most doctors are kind of pressed for time. I know that for the first couple decades that I practiced, that yeah, your first goal is to book up your practice and keep it full. And so you don't have a lot of time. And so when these labs come in, I'm speaking as a physician, is that you go through and you eyeball what is out of range. Okay, here's iron. Is iron out of range? 281. Well, no, they're in range, that's good. So you go check, 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 check. Even sometimes you go faster than that. And faster than that is you rely on the company. In this case, it's LabCorp, and I've made this generic, so we're not looking at anybody. But it is one of the two people that I've fictionalized slightly today to explore this situation, is that you go, okay, that's bold. What's going on here? Oh, it's a ratio, and you check in the components of the ratio, and you go, okay, that's all right. Oh, omega panel. Well, nobody takes that except me and a few other people. And you quickly go through and say what's out of range, and if omega-3, omega-6-3 ratio, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, cholesterol. How high is the cholesterol? And a normal doctor would go, holy smokes, you're 354. That's very large, very high. We'll get to that later today, but what I'm saying is, in the compressed time of working with your doctor, nobody sits back and sort of like, I wonder if there's something else going on in these labs. You look at carnitine, hemoglobin, thyroid, glutathione, vitamin D, B1. Nobody takes a lot of these tests, by the way. But what I'm saying, the process is still the same. So finally, something did catch my eye. What caught my eye was low free thyroid T3. But the T4 was fine, as we'll explore later, so I'm not going to explain that. I'm just giving you the raw beginning of how one gets into, is something going on? Certainly the client or patient has their story, and they may go, I'm doing okay. Well, and then you look at it and go, well, you got a few things we can look at. Okay, I'm going to stop that to show you the process of winnowing down and coming up with something valuable in this morass of labs. How do you find out what's relevant? Now you can take labs until the cows come home and have pages and pages and pages of them. But the trick is to pull out what's relevant and to see if there's a pattern and to see if there is something that you, or better yet, the client can do for themselves and stop doing something that's, an obstacle to their own health, or start doing something that will improve their health. I mean, that's it. Put it in their hands that they have actionable items, and that's where I'm coming from. Actionable information that you can act on. Okay, first thing is, these two people were both on what is called an ACE inhibitor, or nowadays they call it an so ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. It's a medication that's roughly about maybe 60 years old, and it's now being called a angiotensin receptor blocker, otherwise known as an ARBs. How clever. Same thing, different name. Maybe it's a different medication. Not at all. And so this was on the end of this. So one is a female 65, and it goes over a period of about 1.5 to 2 years of both of these. And that's kind of the special quality. I had a before and after. Inadvertently, I had a before and after of these various labs. But before I get into that, 2019 from Cleveland Clinic, came out in October of a couple of years ago. Roughly about 13 million people in the United States are on these ARBs, or angiotensin ACE inhibitors. And it's been that way, very common. It's one of the first medications people are put on. It's an anti-hypertension medication. It brings down your medication, keeps you from having too high a blood pressure, and that would be blood pressure over 140/90, which is called malignant hypertension, above that line. So the reason people are put on antihypertension is because they don't want to have a stroke or a heart attack, which are the obvious outcomes of high blood pressure. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty clear thinking. That's what doctors do. Son, daughter, man, woman, you have high blood pressure. We cannot have that. You are living in a dangerous condition. Let's stop that. Fine, all good, no bad people in that particular situation. But what is unusual is that if a person doesn't change their situation, in other words, if they don't take care of the reason that they had hypertension, high blood pressure, and they just stay on this medication thinking, well, I just had to take this pill and life was good. No, life is not good. That pill goes on to create other situations called unintended consequences, otherwise known as side effects, and they create other, and that's what we're going to explore today. What caught my eye of their labs is the following. So let's just break to that. Okay, so now I've just given you another page, a blinding page of numbers, not to impress you, but to show you kind of stage two. Where do you put that raw data, right? People come into you, that you order their labs, which is something that I certainly do. That's where I live, so to say, in labs. And then you get this first raw data, pages after pages. Now, what I do, and I should have started doing this a good 30 years ago, and I was advised by my brother 30 years ago to say, hey, you know, one thing you could do to really set yourself apart and really get some good insight is to do a spreadsheet and you'll see patterns. Of course, I was the doctor I just told you about. Too much under pressure. I built my practice, didn't have enough time to do all these extracurricular things. So I never did this until about, has it been, I don't think it's quite 10 years. On this particular spreadsheet, I think it just goes back not even a few years. But the idea really, and I've sort of developed this and I realized, wow, there's something you can really see. So across the top there, you can't see it, are all different people. Right? So you got female versus male, their age, and so these are all the tests and categories. So I have pounds overweight as opposed to BMI. I have, so all the data that you saw on that first sheet goes in here, gets plotted along, and not every client, if they start with me initially, they'll have a big, long list of things to do, but sometimes they give me their past things and I put that in here because I want to see patterns. I want to see what is going on with them. So I don't want to see just them. I want to see them in the course, in the context of a larger setting of people. And I can do things from this, like making charts about relative to age or comparing different labs to each other, which is incredibly insightful and very helpful. But anyway, this is what we got. These are all the labs down the side. Some of these, most of these you probably haven't heard of. Then there's a whole other panel I do from SpectraCell, and then there's the Dutch hormone panel, and then I go into the genomic thing. So it goes on, yeah. But the key was the spreadsheet, and that's the second step to giving a context of, But the problem with the spreadsheet is not everything reveals itself just by looking at it. I don't know, this just looks like a lot of numbers to me. Well, when you line up, which I first started doing, I started lining up insulin resistance and the degree, actually glucose and insulin resistance compared to total cholesterol. And I realized, wow, there is a correlation. The worse they were in terms of higher insulin, the lower their cholesterol was. I go, nobody told me that in the first 25 years of practice. And I thought, what else is here? So from there, I met somebody who works in statistics, a professor in statistics. He said, have you ever done scatter plots? I go, what's that? He goes, well, long story short, this came out of the 1600s with Descartes. He's the first one that came up with scatter plots, and it's very helpful. So I'll show you what that is. So the first thing in getting to making scatter plots is you take that spreadsheet, remember raw data to spreadsheet, and you transpose it. You flip the sides. And so now we have all the labs on top, and we have the people on the side. So what you can do from here, which is really pretty interesting, you just pick a column. Let's say we go to, there's IGF, of course. Let's say we go to total cholesterol. Total cholesterol, we put in total cholesterol to thyroid. So we click both of these, and we box them in, and then we make a chart from that, and we see how they relate to each other. It's absolutely fascinating, and I collect that as data on a per person basis, and we get to see a closer look of their situation. That's all I'm trying to say here. Very interesting. It's a tool that I can't imagine if I had this 2 decades ago, I would have been writing books about, I don't know, cholesterol and thyroid or something. It's coming. Finally, I will introduce you to our 2 main characters. I fictionalized them somewhat. Those are images I've just simply taken off the internet, and they are not those people. And I've changed the story only slightly to skip out some of the inconsequential details. But it goes like this. There was a man 66 and 64. We're going to go back in time for his labs later. And a woman 65. They're both on the ACE inhibitor. You already knew that. He was on an ACE and a diuretic for basically 30 years, then was taken off, I guess it was about 15 years and put back on, and I think taken off, but about 2 years ago, he was off it and had to be put back on. So we're going to see a before and after of that particular time period. The woman has never been on an ACE inhibitor. She was on it for a year and a half ago, and she quit about 6 weeks ago. So we're going to see some before and afters of the ACE inhibitors, one with a slightly different history. Pretty interesting though. So now we are going to see what happened to their IGF levels. What the heck does that mean? We're going to do scatter plots of labs to determine what's going on with these 2 people, both on ACE inhibitors for high blood pressure. Let's start with IGF. Okay, so I've done another video before, I'll get a reference in a second, on IGF. I'll be doing probably 4 or 5 other videos on it and different aspects of it, because I think it's very, very important. Probably the most important lab hormone that you could take and know something about for yourself, and that's part of the agenda for this particular video. So need to know over a lifetime, IGF over a lifetime. So this is from LabCorp, which is a lab that I use for my clients. So I took all their data and I put it in a graph, just kind of like I showed you, and it printed this out. Here we have female in the beige, and we have male in the green. It's more or less the same pattern, right? Altered by what, a year and a half. And that's always the case, that women develop, or girls develop sooner than boys. Well, yeah, it's pretty clear that's the case. So that's what LabCorp shows us, this rise and fall from the low end to the high end. We'll elaborate on that in a second. But here's my data. Here's all the people that I've seen. I put them in, and I did a scatter plot of IGF and age. And so it shows it does go down with age, but it looks different than there. So this is basically from 15. So it's from the peak down this way, similar but different. This is where I've covered all this detail before. You may want to go back and watch that video to get a background on IGF. I'm not going to repeat a lot of that stuff. So the man, 64 to 66, 15 years on an ACE inhibitor, what the heck happened? First of all, we're going to look at his IGF versus age, right? I have my norm, and my norm as an age, as an average, is really around 142 for about 35 years, from 30 to 65. Well, he falls far short. His number was 75 from that massive labs we saw, and this is it. So my first question, head scratcher, is saying he's below normal, and what's going on? There's got to be a reason, because he's kind of somewhat athletic. He's certainly very rigorous. He's not a couch potato in any manner of speaking. She also I've known for 20 years, and then came back and we're sort of working together. So IGF and age with her, that's where the male was up there. So she came in at 55. Up until this very week, she was the lowest in all of my career in terms of lowest lab for IGF. Very low. So low and very low, male, female. Both are far below the level for their age. So we go, all right, well, that's interesting. Let's look more deeply into some of their other labs. Let's look at thyroids, cholesterol, and glucagon levels to see what they can tell us about the bigger picture. Specifically, we're going to look at thyroid first, probably to the point that you're going to go, no more, no more. But it's very interesting for me, and I hope for you as well, and I hope you do this on yourself. That's my agenda here. So we're going to look at thyroid by age. We can guess. See, this very point about age, IGF is really the only lab that has an age-relevant range. Others are, here's the range, here's the range, here's the range. Whether you're 12, 24, 75, 105. And you go, doesn't make sense, does it? No, it doesn't make sense at all, but that's how it is. So that's the first thing that superimposing that. So here's a thyroid by age, T4, T3, TSH, and the ratio of T3, T4. Okay, here we go. This is just by age, nobody's results. We're starting off with free T4, then free T3, and I'm just going to call them T4 and T3 after this. The ratio of T3 to T4, which actually is really in the last 5 years has become a lot of research behind this. TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. And then I just put them all together so you sort of see what happens with age. Never seen this before. I would have appreciated seeing this in medical school a long time ago. I would have appreciated being the guy doing this 20 years ago. So what this shows is over the course from 15 to 80 in this particular spreadsheet I have, those are older actually into 88. More or less, T4 doesn't change much, right? So what I showed over here, here's T4. It's a very narrow range. Look at from 1 1/4 to not even 1 1/2. So that's basically a straight line, but yeah, it has a bow to it. You can see that. But what does change now, so that's T4. Consider it flat. T3 is the blue one. T3 has this amazing slide. It's up and it peaks really around age 30, slides down to about, I'd say 67, call it 65 for round math, then pretty much levels out at that point. It's a whole different story. So T3 is converted from T4. The whole T thing is that there's 4 iodines on the thyroid hormone. And when you subtract one of those iodines, you have 4 minus 1 is 3. That's the essence. T4 to T3 is minus an iodine. So the conversion of T4 to T3 happens a lot when you're younger and happens less and less and less as you get older. This blue is simply the ratio, and you can see the ratio of the conversion. It kind of flatlines again in your late 50s and 60s. So what is the beige? The beige is the thyroid stimulating hormone, and it primarily keys off of only T3. You could say a little bit of T4, but mostly it's like 95% keying off of T3. When your T3 starts to fall, for whatever reason, we're just looking at a whole average of people to give us this graph. When it starts to fall, your TSH starts to go up. So the reason I put that in is because most doctors only look, unless they're an endocrinologist, most doctors only look at your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, and saying, oh, is it within range? And that's it. It's just like I showed you, within range, nothing to worry about. Well, the story goes far beyond that. Okay, so let's go far beyond that ourselves. So we are going to look at their thyroid panel lab results. So they're both on ACE inhibitors, female 65 on for 1.5 years, male 66 on for 15 years of the last reference we're looking at, then taken off and put back on. What do we notice? Well, from those labs we saw is that the T3, the free T3, was almost identical. So the only thing they have in common is they're about the same age. They're within 1 year of each other. And their T4 is different enough, but that's within range. There's that range, right? He's basically right to the top of the range. He's almost about to be hypothyroid relative to that. The T3, T4 ratio, they're below range, very low. The TSH, he's very high. That's kind of borderline. There's the range. He's coming up to being hypothyroid. He's not there yet. And here's their IGF that you saw before. She's 55, meaning the number was IGF of 55, the lowest I've ever had. And he's 75, not much above that. Both incredibly low. They both had these very low results. This is what caught my eye, the T3 and the IGF. What the heck do these have to do with each other? So the T3 range, this is what you just saw. There's the age of T3. Now I'm putting in their numbers. His was 1.8 for the T3, and her was basically the same, 1.7. They're very low. They're not even on my graph at all. They're below my graph and just marginally within range, okay? The other thing that I forgot to mention, though I did type it in, he was put on a thyroid medication, a T4 thyroid medication called Synthroid. Very common for those who are hypothyroid to be put on Synthroid, T4. Well, that was 30 years ago. Then again with the putting back on the ACE inhibitor, or the ARB. So he's getting T4. So here we go. Now we look at his labs. His T4 is at the absolute top of the range. So he's 1.7, the range is 1.8. He's way up there. She, however, is below. So you go, that's interesting. Well, if he has all this T4, why isn't he converting it to T3 like I showed you before? He's not. It's just not being converted. So they're giving him more and more of the thyroid and it's not happening. Or they're giving thyroid and it's just not happening for him. So here's that range of T3, T4. Both of them are very low. They're actually off the chart. The optimal is basically around 2.5. They're not even in the 2s. So what is going on? Something about their thyroid is going on. Clearly something about their IGF is going on. Let's explore this. TSH we'll get to in future slides of this video. And this again is that same sort of master scenario saying, wait a minute, if this person they're being given, now we're speaking about him, if he's being given T4, why don't we see his T3 higher? If he's being given T4, why don't we see his T3? Something's up. Specifically now, free T4. Here we go. You've seen this. I just blew it up for you. Remember, he's also on a thyroid medication T4, so he should have a bunch of it, and he does have a bunch of it. In essence, we are measuring his thyroid medication. Yeah, we see the thyroid medication, but it's not doing anything for him. So notice here, if you only looked at the reference range, you would miss what is happening. Because the reference range is 0.8 to 1.8. He's all right, he's at the top of the reference range, but he's still within range, so it would be a non-story. So why are we following this non-story? Let's go further. Her situation, on the other hand, is a little bit different. She's down here. She's low, not off by far, and so this really isn't their dramatic story. Here's the difference between them. 1.7 on medication, not taking thyroid medication, 1.08. Pretty interesting to see that. Now we're going to go thyroid by IGF, right? So we're doing free T3 and IGF. All these are IGF, 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 IGF. And you'll find that it's almost a mirror image opposite. Well, that's what a mirror image is, thyroid by age. So it goes, as IGF gets higher, your T3 goes up. But as we get older, as I showed you way up front, is that your IGF decreases. So life kind of goes down this way. But these graphs are all about the higher the IGF, all these graphs are just the opposite. So we're looking at the mirror opposite. So we're looking at age versus IGF. IGF, we're looking at free T4, IGF, not by age, but IGF. And what it does, it magnifies the differences. So now, remember before he has that 1.7? Now it's huge. He's way up there. So the IGF, this is just a scatter plot, so there's no normal range for IGF versus free T4. But I have my numbers and I have my graph that I can put of where the norms are of the people I've seen. And I think can you imagine if every doctor did this, even for 1 week? They hired somebody, here's your labs, boom. You'd be able to see this reproduced by 100 times, if not 1,000 times. And you would authenticate this particular information right beyond argument. Countrywide, if not culture-wide, if not Europe-wide, Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, Canada, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I take it pretty much as gospel for me. But the difference now, relative to my graph of IGF and free T4 is huge. He's way up there. And she's below graph. She's below the lowest I've ever had. So 65 female, 66 male. Says that the range of IGF is 57 to 202, and we know that their IGF was 55 and 75. And remember, he's taking this T4. So it's almost like he's taking something that's useless. It's not causing any changes. It's not doing what it's supposed to do, which is convert to T3. What is Synthroid supposed to do? Why is it prescribed? The thinking is if a person's TSH is higher than normal, right? They are hypothyroid. If their TSH is, here we go, if their TSH is higher than normal up here, by adding T4 down here, you will increase the conversion into T3, and that's your ultimate goal. You're not giving T3, you're making the body at least convert it. So for some reason, you can give T4 until the cows come home in this particular person, and it's just not converting. So the thing is, the reason it doesn't work, one of the reasons it doesn't work, is that when IGF is low, everything's shut down. It's like you've taken the power out of the vacuum. It's not working. Doesn't matter what you want to do, it's just not going to work. The power's not there. I see IGF, by the way, as kind of a vitality hormone. You measure that, it's like, do you have the electricity to make everything run? If you're low IGF, I'm going to expect a lot of problems. I just have to find out what the biggest problem is. Or something that is preventing the conversion of T4 to T3. Okay, so now let's go on. It is age, that you've seen this before, age and T3. Put these guys in there. They're basically the same number. They're both below my graph. And you go, why doesn't he have higher T3 since he's taking T4? That's what a doctor does. Hey, you have low thyroid. I'm going to give you a precursor, in essence, so you will increase. I don't know if it was ever shown or taken labs to show if his thyroid increased, but according to labs I have, they haven't increased. Now the T3. they're super, super low, IGF to T3. It emphasizes how low they are. Interesting, huh? It's like, how can they be so far below the graph? How can they be so far below normal? What the heck is going on? And here's the optimal range of the T3 to T4 ratio. It's this new thing, and I'm going to show you research in a second, that is really important. Pretty narrow range, wouldn't you say? So basically between 2.4 and 2.7, call it 2.5. These guys aren't even in the 2. They are so small. They're so under the graph. Again, so under the graph. So we have an IGF thing going on. We have a thyroid thing going on. Extremely low. T3, T4 versus IGF. Again, it's going to magnify the results. We're going to see what's not happening here. So he's off the chart. He's off the chart in terms of so far below the graph that I couldn't put him on. I had to sort of say, he's down there. He's down there, way down there. So now we have a context to look something further. So why I want to show you that T3 and T4 have a relevance that really is being looked at in the last 10 years, and certainly in the last 5. This is interesting. So this is a study from China, but the data they're using is from the United States. So in the United States, you have this thing called NHANES. NHANES is a period in time. So they go NHANES, and they used to call it 1, 2, 3, and now they put the date. NHANES is study a large population of Americans, labs and so on and so forth. And then they sort of look into this population, see what correlations they can make. So this Chinese study said, we're going to go and take this and we're going to see, as each person that's been studied has a condition, we're going to go see what conditions line up with this particular ratio. So they took the T3, T4 ratio and they looked for 3 conditions. One is all-cause mortality, basically rates of death, cardiovascular, the death from cardiovascular problems, and then cardiovascular disease. So death specifically cardiovascular, and then cardiovascular problems. So here we go. What they're saying is how to read this. This red line is where I want to get your attention. And notice we have a 246, 246, 246. That is the ratio of T3 to T4, right? So the ratio, so a 2 ratio would be, it's twice as high. T3 is twice as high as T4. 4 is higher, 6 is higher, right? But it says the lower you are in terms of the T3 to T4 ratio, the higher your risk of death by any cause, the higher your risk of cardiovascular death or death due to a cardiovascular disease, and of course the higher the risk of cardiovascular disease. Interesting. So where do these guys come in? Well, I put their data right here. So there is 1.6 and 1.1, and I'm saying it's so low his was even off the graph, so to say. So we have 1.1 and 1.6, and we have these graphs that stop at 2, so they are off the graph onto the left. Each one, they're off to the left. So they have a risk that they don't even know they had a risk. That's a big deal. So the study that you can link to if you want to read it, and it is fascinating, T3, T4 ratio is correlated with all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, cardiovascular disease risk, NHANES 2007, 2012, and the study came out analyzing that pocket of data, that epic of data in 2022. Okay, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, versus age specifically, and then IGF. So are you saying they're mirror images of each other? Absolutely. Wouldn't you say it's a mirror image of each other? One is, as you get older, 15 to 80, my group of people, there's the pattern, and I kept the reference ranges pretty similar from, this is slightly different, from 1 to 5 and 0 to 5. I should have matched that up. But you can see the image is the same, and it's mirror imaging. Okay, so now we're going to look at TSH versus age. I told you we'd talk about this later. TSH versus age on her and him. When the data gets so squished together, I have to make separate graphs, and it's hard to figure out how to give you the bird's eye view. So here's their data down here. TSH for her, for him, and TSH before, when she was 63 and he was 64. So that's what we're doing. So what we see with her, 65 to 63, that she had a lower TSH, which is good. So her lower, and I tried to put it right on the kind of where the dot should have been. So yeah, it's still below range, but she's under the range. It's going, but both increase is the point. Here's the trend. The trend is towards a hypothyroid. She has a long way to go. The trend for him, he started at a higher number. So he started normal. So when he was 64, he had a normal TSH. Remember where TSH was only one of the thyroid variables? So he had a normal TSH, so it would be no reason to look further, right? Don't want to look, nothing to see here. But he goes on his ARB, his ACE inhibitor, and wow, he's at the top of the range. He's coming out to the top of the range. It's a very quick change. Something's going on here. Okay, so now we're doing TSH by IGF. And so now it's going to be pointed in the opposite direction, but it tells us the same thing. She went from 136 when her, and this is the IGF, she was 143 IGF a year and a half ago. And she dropped 100 points in her IGF. So her thyroid stimulating hormone went from 1.36 to 1.8. It was lower, it went higher. He went from his IGF from 100 to 75, less of a change, but look how much changed for his TSH. He's becoming more hypothyroid. Her less so, she's moving it, the trend is the same, but her numbers are just not. You can't say that about her. But here we go. So the before and after was fascinating. So let's go back to the beginning for a second. IGF by age. I got something to add to it. It's going to muddy the waters a little bit, but not really. So here's what you saw before. This is according to LabCorp, right? Put the data in. So according to LabCorp, she should be, at her age for 65, around 175. I think it's a little high, but that's their data. They got more data than me. And for the men's, he should be here. So he should be around 200, but he's around, he's at 75. And so 75 is the amount for a 78-year-old male. So you could say this accelerated his aging, certainly by thyroid, and we're going to get into it even more, 12 years. So that medication has aged him 12 years. He can reverse that by stop doing that. We're going to hope his numbers are going to come back. Same with her. But look at her. She's supposed to be 175. She's 55. So this medication aged her from 65 to 90 according to the LabCorp numbers. It's not me anymore. So what my results have showed, you saw this graph before, I just sort of marked it out. When you look at it, it's pretty much a plateau from 30 to 65, and that plateau average is 142. So the average of IGF is 142 from ages 30 to 65. Isn't that interesting? But then it drops off, so you have to go, what's going on after 65? Well, in the United States anyway, they retire. So what does retirement mean? Are you less active? Are you less focused? Are you less mentally? So something's going on after 65, and this is where I think you can intervene on your own behalf and make it so this decline is not so precipitous. And you can probably not level it off and be at the same level. It's going to decline no matter what, but you will make a big difference here in your lifespan, as they say. But wait, I need to apologize. I am sorry for something. What am I sorry for? In that video I showed you before, that I did about a month or so ago, I went over a lot of different studies, and there's this one study from UCLA that was put in Aging Cell in February 2022, so barely a year and a half ago. And what they did was not new research. They collected the data from around the world of other countries and cultures that did their own age versus IGF in all these countries. So they did age versus IGF, and they did gender differences and so on and so forth. They put all that data from 14 different studies, combined over 30,000 people over the ages of 30 years old, so they're just looking from 30 beyond, and they said, you know, don't get so worried about age-related number. One number will help. It's got to be 140. So I go, what an ignorant thing to say. One number? We did, you know, in that video I showed cultures, all these variations. One number, what a stupid thing to say. Well, I'm going to eat crow because my data shows it was 142. So if my data shows what their data did, then I have to sort of assume that they had much more, shall we say, virtue. Theirs was probably pretty correct and probably insightful. So this is time for me to eat crow. However, so this was my criticism before. After age 30, I put in 130. I said, that's absurd because on an average, that really only makes sense for a person of where's halfway. Halfway is right about here. For people in their 50s and 60s, 140 is a good number. After that, it becomes too high. And before that, it's not high enough. But that was my criticism. So then as I said, I ate crow. But they're not completely exonerated because what it doesn't show, per my data, is that after 65, it does decrease very quickly, and this just happens to be male. I could have shown female, but it's the same thing. This is the area that it drops off completely. My data and their data pretty much lined up specifically the same. So there you go. Interesting though, but there's still something to walk away from. So let's just, before I go on to part 2, I just wanted to summarize where we've been. So 2 people came in and they got their labs done. You have pages of labs, you got the raw data, we saw that. Then it goes into a spreadsheet, right? We did the spreadsheet thing. And then from the spreadsheet, we looked into scatter plots to further define what we're doing. I think that process is unbelievably insightful. Okay, so coming immediately in part 2, and we're going to look at an entirely different context, different labs, of course. Surprised? And these labs are IGF, of course. It's all going to be IGF related. It always is. Fasting glucose and insulin. I'm not going to do, though I do A1C, it wasn't a helpful addition to this particular, and we got too much data anyway. Lab panel, otherwise known as your cholesterol levels, and glucagon. So that's what we're going to look at next time. See you there. So if this is something that you're interested in, that is a topic that I obviously go deeper in terms of labs, in terms of how to do it, in terms of why you would want to do it, various topics that you've seen that I've done in the past, then please let me know below in a comment. Till then.